Great. Okay, hi, I'm Jedi Hill, your host, and today's special guest is Mike Ross. He's running for the New York governor in 24, but not as a Democrat or a Republican. He's actually going after the third party, the Libertarian, where we focus on freedom. And as everybody knows, this podcast is going to be about freedom in all different aspects. And getting the government off your back is one of the biggest ones to help you with that. Thank you coming on, Mike. Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, Jedi. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm actually running for governor in North Carolina. I think
North Carolina.
New York might be a lost cause when it comes to liberty, but I think there's still a shot here in North Carolina.
Sad but true, and I apologize for misstating that. But it would be cool if we actually had suddenly a libertarian mayor of New York City.
I at our convention this couple weeks ago, Larry Sharp was here, and he's fighting for liberty in New York harder than anybody else I can think of. So that would be pretty awesome. But if anybody can do it, Larry's the guy. So
fingers crossed. Maybe somebody can talk him into that when they see this. So. Absolutely. Mike, what got you to be, one of these rebel razzle, these freedom fighters that are actually working on restoring liberty and, our Bill of Rights back from being attacked by big government? What got you on that path?
Yeah. So, I've always been a small L libertarian ever since I kind of was introduced to some of the ideas back when I was a teenager in the 90s, right? And then COVID hit, and you kind of saw this big growth of big government, right? Like where you had pastors being told they can't open their church doors, right? And you just think about First Amendment's pretty clear on that one. And you just saw these big oversteps. And I started kind of looking locally, like right here in my county. And there were a couple of cases that really kind of got me more involved and kind of turned me from just like business owner and libertarian to activist. And one of them was the case involving a guy named Joshua Rohrer. He was a homeless veteran who was standing kind of at a well-known intersection with his service dog, and the Gastonia Police Department basically beat him up, tased his service dog, threw him in jail. His set ridiculously high bonds, the whole process. So I kind of saw that and said, I'm just going to go talk to my city council and say, we hadn't heard anything from them. Do you guys even know about this case that's happening right here in your city, right? So we actually had 9 rallies that came out of that, and I linked up with another guy named Pastor Moses Colbert. He actually was running a church, still is running a church, but we've got a homeless issue, like a lot of areas really at this point. It's not even just cities, right? It's kind of everywhere. And he was essentially using the basement of his church. There were a bunch of homeless people that kind of lived in the woods, and he kind of just said, what, as long as they're not hurting anybody or bothering anybody, I'll let them set up tents on the church property and let them live there. And his normal ministry is like feeding homeless people lunch and dinner every single day, right? Feeding people. And then it got really cold, and he decided to say, hey, come on inside. About 50, 60 people were sleeping at night in the basement of his church, and the local city council, through the zoning ordinances and all of that, basically kicked 60 homeless people back out into being homeless, out of a shelter, send him a letter that says, you're a church, you need to operate as such, which, kind of left me scratching my head. But
isn't charity a big part about the church as well? I come on here. That's part of doing the Lord's work.
You're stealing one of my rally speeches when I spoke to the city council, right? If a church can't feed and shelter those in need, I don't know. Is that church reading the Bible? Because when Pastor Moses reads the Bible, that's kind of what he felt called to. Right. And I just saw that as a more overstepping. And in that case, it was really the city council there is about half Republicans, half Democrats, 3-3, and then one independent who was a former Democrat. Right. He's now independent, supposedly. And he's actually running for mayor. But essentially, none of them cared. Right. None of them cared on either of these situations. We had to fight for months just to get body cam footage released. Joshua had like tens of thousands of dollars in legal expenses, which, anybody who's had any kind of problem with law enforcement, and law enforcement is supposed to be protecting and serving us, right? And like going after bad people and protecting society from that. But when they're beating up a guy who created no victims, was peacefully standing there just smiling and waving, and if someone felt it in their heart to give him some money or some dog food or something like that, he would take it, right? That's kind of human nature, right? If someone's going to be kind to you and do something when you're struggling, we're going to want to take it, right? And none of them seem to care. And through all of that, like, despite the fact that the Republicans and Democrats always talk about how the other side is the worst, they operate kind of in lockstep and unity when it comes to infringing on our rights, to benefiting special interests over the regular citizenry. So that's kind of where I started joking about the uniparty. And when I decided to run for governor, I just kicked it off and said, you know what, I'm going to name my whole campaign "Fire the Uniparty" and talk about all these things that, like, they're polarizing you against your neighbors, and making you think that your neighbor's a bad guy because he votes for the other team of Team Red and Team Blue. Meanwhile, they're getting together, having a steak dinner on your dime and talking about how they're going to help, Pfizer generate more profits or anything else.
I get where you're coming from on the uniparty, and there are lots of bought out Republicans, the rhinos like your Mitch McConnells and all those. But I still find, like, on the left, you got that woke mind virus.
Sure.
Like, at least most people that are like Republican, as not the politicians, but just the Republicans themselves, they just want to be left alone, get the government out of their business and life.
Some of them. The problem, I think, is that they feed into the division, right? We've gotten this polarized society where conservatives and progressives, right? Because I look at it, and I've got both conservatives and progressives on my campaign team, people who were formerly Republicans, formerly Democrats, whole bunch of libertarians, right? But the basic tenets of libertarianism is kind of what forms the foundation of my whole platform and why I'm running to do this. Because we've entered this society where you're either a communist or a racist if you listen to the screaming masses. And when you get called these things, when they're objectively not true, right, it pushes people into this tribalism, right, where even if Republicans are negotiating away gun rights, right, that's something that, like, I joke about the NRA, that they are actually just means negotiating rights away, right? They claim to be this gun group, but like GOA or a number of other gun rights groups actually will not negotiate rights away. So you have this polarization, and it creates that tribalism, right, where it's us or them. I always look through the lens, and some people, some people may use it to call me a conspiracy theorist, right? Like thought crimes are real, but
they are.
Yeah. Well, they'll come out and say, well, we're so entrenched and polarized, but you have to ask, like, who's this polarization benefiting? Is the regular everyday conservative or the regular everyday progressive finding any benefit at all to their life from this polarization? I don't think they are. I really don't think they are. But you know who is? The government. In every case, the government is just seizing more power. And as long as we're fighting over, hey, I'm not a racist, or hey, I'm not a communist, I just want a social safety, like, as long as that's the argument, we're never going to come together and be like, hey, these people are screwing us over. They're stealing from us and violating our rights. And if we just stop this bickering over things, over essentially our anger at people who don't have power, right, we could come together and actually, like, tell those in power, hey, you need to govern for us instead of special interests. But as long as they can keep us divided, that's not going to happen. That's why, while there's some things that both conservatives and progressives get really upset and emotional and angry about, I'm just not going to play the game as a candidate. I'm not going to play the game as governor, because at the end of the day, the mission is too important, right? The mission is really trying to pull power away from the government and put it back in the hands of the citizens, right? Push the power downward. You've got a situation where the federal government is infringing on all of the states. Most of the states are infringing on all of the counties, and the counties are infringing on the people.
And that's where we got to flip the mindset.
Yeah.
Because freedom isn't free. It takes personal responsibility.
It does.
Like, you've got to build the discipline and work at it. Each individual, you can't just be lazy, go vote once every 4 years, or, hope your Social Security is going to be there and you can depend on the government. And it is just bad because we're already going towards a universal basic income due to AI and improvements in robotics. So you're splitting the people yet again. between the haves and the have-nots, those who are going to be on the universal basic income and those who have assets and things to actually live.
Yeah. I mean, UBI is an interesting concept, right? When you think about it, like hypothetically into the age of automation, right? When most labor is kind of being done by robots, right? You still have to, you're not going to get rid of human workforce. There's always going to be some things that robots are just not there to do, at least probably in our lifetimes, right, Jedi? But as we're getting to that point, this whole idea of UBI, I think, is an extremely slippery slope, right? Because the idea behind it, right, where they're like, hey, do away with all these entitlement programs, right? All these entitlements that are having, that when you look at like the actuarial calculations down the road at the state and even federal level, they're not sustainable. And we are not on a pace where all these entitlements, if we don't do anything, they're just going to blow up, and letting them blow up in an unexpected and sharp way is going to cause the most pain for the people that are there, as opposed to having like the idea of systematically getting to a situation where they're not needed. The problem I have with UBI, because, Andrew Yang kind of caught my attention with the whole Forward Party and everything to hear what he's saying. But UBI, and I've even seen some conservatives like, hey, but we can get rid of all of these entitlement programs, right? And just have this one thing, and it helps everybody evenly. It's equitable. Here's the problem with UBI, which is not a state issue. And, but this is just a liberty conversation. The problem with UBI is once you give the ruling class something that everybody gets, and it's a direct cash payment, every election from that point on, you're dealing with a politician whose sole thing that they're going to run on is, we're going to give you more money through UBI, right? And you essentially now have this situation where it's bribing voters, and everyone's trying to outdo themselves on who's going to raise this higher. And once they get into the office, they're not going to actually govern for the regular people. They don't care about us.
Well, that's there, but they're already doing that. I just look at Biden with his unconstitutional promises to cancel student loans.
Yeah,
to try and buy millions of votes.
Think about how much easier that is, because at least when Biden says that, right, people who are have an understanding of jurisprudence and the Constitution, like it was pretty straightforward. And I would personally, I still have some student loans. I wouldn't mind that with as much as they take from me on other things. But I looked at it, I said, there's no way this is going to happen, right? So there were a lot of people who probably could look at that and have enough understanding of the Constitution to know, hey, this isn't going to happen. So they wouldn't sway that vote. But if you have UBI in place and the infrastructure exists where we're all getting our central bank digital currency being thrown down to us from the federal government, once that's in practice, all you're talking about when they run on this is changing the number. If it's upheld by the Supreme Court and UBI gets into existence, it's so much easier to lie about that, right? Because you can't make that promise of, hey, I'm going to forgive your student loans. Some people are like, yeah, you can't do that. I'm not going to buy your nonsense. If they get in place and they say, hey, you're getting $1,500 a month from UBI, elect me and you'll get $2,000. And then the other guy's like, hey, you elect me, you'll get 25, right? And if they actually have the power to do that, they can they can do that. The question is anybody actually thinking about what else they're trying to do, right? They're going to bribe you to try to get in there. Why do they want to get in there so much? What are they really trying to do? And that's kind of the thing that, I guess as a libertarian, I'm just naturally a little distrustful of government. I would say it's not just because I'm a libertarian. I'd say it's because I've looked at the evidence, but
which is why you became a libertarian.
It is, right? Yeah. Looking at the evidence definitely played a big part in that. Yep.
Well, the UBI, the central bank digital currencies, and that is a dictator's wet dream.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And they've already shown it in China with the social credit system. It's like, oh, we didn't like your social media post today, so you can't have food this week with the click of a button.
Yeah. That's what they're working toward. It's not like it's not an idea that rulers and the ruling class haven't had in their mind for thousands of years, right? Like empires have collapsed on this, even recently, right? This whole idea that we can just create money out of thin air and that it will somehow buck economic reality, right? Like that's really what it comes down to. Like after World War I, the Weimar Republic, right? They're dealing with like runaway inflation. What are they doing? They just ramp up more inflation. And before you know it, you're paying like 1 million marks for a loaf of bread, right? And everybody's a millionaire, but everybody's suffering under that situation. And
the
central bank digital
$1 trillion bill.
Yeah, a CBDC allows them to do that with essentially blinders on the masses because the masses don't even understand like base level cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, right? So they're just like, oh yeah, hey, it's dollars, right? It's dollars. So they think that's what it is. What they don't realize is that when you centralize it, just like power or anything else, the more centralized something is, the fewer players playing the game as far as having say and influence on the decisions that are made. The more likely that centralized power is going to infringe on the masses. It's just power centralizes. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that really is that's the ultimate empowerment of the Federal Reserve. If you give a central bank digital currency, it's strengthening the Fed, both the federal government and the Federal Reserve. And like, why should the Federal Reserve been strengthened? Look at what has happened to the United States since the Federal Reserve came into existence. Their whole purpose was supposedly to prevent boom and busts. Has that happened? Like anyone who's been alive today, right? Like I'm in finance. It's what I do for a living, right? Is markets. And how did we have these bank collapses? That's the whole reason the Fed was put into place over 100 years ago.
Okay, to be fair, SVN was a hit job for the Silicon Valley National Bank. You have 200 billion in assets. You have 40 billion withdrawn in 2 days. And that is going to crash any bank in the country for a bank run at that ratio.
Sure. But if the Federal Reserve didn't exist, could SVB have gotten itself into that situation in the first place? I don't think they could. I mean, if you're pulling out because what led to SVB's collapse, right, is they took it in where they're taking in deposits and they dumped them into government bonds, right, while rates were low and money was cheap. And then the way bonds work, when rates go up and you're collecting less of a coupon on your bonds, the principal value drops. So they have all of these risk-free or low-risk assets on their balance sheet because they're getting that yield. Then the Fed goes on and does what the Fed is supposed to do, and it collapses them, right? That whole process of the Fed being involved and the government, they haven't nationalized banking because the American people wouldn't go for it with that, that wording. But when you look at the interconnectedness of banks, my wife actually works for one of these big banks. When SVB was going down and the federal government probably couldn't say, hey, we're going to bail out the banks because the people won't have that. Like 10 big banks all committed like $5 billion in liquidity, didn't talk to employees, shareholders, anything. Like my wife just got an email. Hey, we're proud to support the regional banking system. As such, we're putting $5 billion in liquidity into the system. Like, why that happened. The federal government came along and said to all these big banks, look, we bailed you guys out last time. The public won't allow us to do this. You guys bail it out or we're going to make your life harder. Like, maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist for saying that. I think I'm just looking at it logically with an understanding of how capital markets work.
From the big bank, though, I forget which one it was. It was like one of the Citibank subgroups or whatever, ended up buying 16 billion of SVN's debt for 500 million.
Yeah.
The big banks are going to jump in and buy those little pieces because you get $16 billion in assets for 500 million. I'll do that deal all day long.
Well, and the government's picking the winners in that too. Like I went through that. I actually worked for Wachovia in 2008, right? So you can imagine working at a bank during that time. I lived it, right? So I remember our share price dropped from like, I don't know, 30, 40 bucks down to like 10 bucks on a Friday. And then over the weekend was that 2008 bank run, right? Where what is it? Washington Mutual, a couple other ones started to go under. Wachovia was one of them. And then on Monday, it hit about 89 cents a share from the $10 it closed on Friday. Trading's halted, and everyone's saying, oh, Wachovia is going out of business, right? So the very next day, there's rumors that Citigroup is going to buy us for $1 a share, right? So we were $10 a share on Friday, $1 a share offer comes in. And the federal government is orchestrating all of this. They're picking the winners. They're picking who gets to come in and do this. They're not saying, hey, if all the libertarians pull together enough money, we'll just let the libertarians, this group of independent libertarians, buy this bank. That's not for pennies on the dollar. That's not how it works, right? And then Thursday, we got an offer of $7 from Wells Fargo. It's now Wells Fargo Bank, right? But that whole process is enabled by the government, and they're picking winners. They're basically creating fire sale assets to do that. that is all only possible and necessary through the regulations and hurdles that government has put in place, right? In a real free market system, if capitalism was actually present in the United States, and this is honestly one of my problems with Republicans, is they claim they're for capitalism. You tell me what part of capitalism involves bank bailouts. I'll wait. Like to any Republican, what part of capitalism is a bank bailout a part of?
Well, and now after Dodd-Frank from the 2008, what's coming next that the public has no clue on, and the FDIC actually had in their meeting in either November or December, I forget which one it was, saying we know it's going to collapse. The FDIC only has like 0.3%. And, 150 billion to handle 9 trillion in that deficit. We know they're bankrupt. We know we can't handle it. And the next step is the bail-ins, where the banks just take your money.
Yeah.
To make the banks whole.
And if it comes to that, like there'll be no recourse, right? Because at the end of the day, they if they can keep the house of cards going, that's the one thing is that kind of gets me going. Because I look at it, right, and I believe that I've studied a lot of economics in what I do for a living and just my hobbies, right? And I generally believe the Austrian school to be the most correct. As far as, I've read Marx, I've read a lot of stuff from the Keynesian school, classic school. I believe the Austrian school is the most correct. It doesn't solve problems the way some of the other ones claim to, but anybody who's paid attention to the other ones with government getting involved in the economy knows they're not really solving problems either. They can sometimes kick the can down the road for a little while, and as long as the masses don't understand what's going on, whether they can kick it down the road for a year, 10 years, 100 years, I don't know. That's yet to be seen. It doesn't really materialize until the masses understand exactly what's happening. So whether that happens in our lifetime, Jedi, or not, I don't know. That's why trying to time that is nearly impossible. But what I'd like to see, I mentioned it earlier, the idea of decentralization of power, right? How does a state protect its citizens from the federal government, right? Like if the federal government implements a central bank digital currency, tries to empower the big banks, the special interests, the large corporations that are involved in so much of the financial scheming that goes on in the economy. How can a state actually resist against this? And it's something like I haven't put it back on my website because I haven't really found a solution that is explainable to the average person. But that's something that I certainly would love to try and tackle as governor of North Carolina, right? And I've had some ideas on it, right?
Okay, so we go back to states' rights.
I don't think
people being sovereign human beings.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I think states have rights. I hate that wording, right? Because states don't have rights. The people have rights. So if the people have rights and they get what they should expect out of their government, a government that protects those rights, if the federal government is infringing on those rights, how can the state government actually uphold those rights? I don't think those rights belong to the state. I think they belong to the people, and the state is just a better vehicle to protect those rights than the federal government is. And
I'm surprised more states don't challenge in court unconstitutional laws.
Well, that's the problem of centralization of power, though, Jedi. When we look at what's happened specifically since 1971, right? We come off the gold standard, and power has
Reagan.
Yeah, power has continued to fluctuate upward, right? At this point, state governments and even local governments, nobody wants to disrupt the status quo because it's a gravy train for the political class. It is a gravy train for the Republicans, for the Democrats, as long as they can keep this thing going at the federal level and not rock the boat and call out the federal government for its destructive policies that will absolutely destroy the economy of the United States if they are allowed to continue doing this. Rather than do that, they realize, hey, if we don't do that, they'll keep sending us billions of dollars. And while that may not actually help our citizens in the long run, it builds the roads, it gets us reelected, it allows us to skim off, millions to hundreds of millions to maybe even billions to special interest donors. And so the system is designed to incentivize politicians not to poke the bear, right? It's designed there. If you go back, 100, 200 years early on, states were much more willing to tell the federal government, hey, no. We've gotten to a point where the state governments very rarely are willing to tell the federal government no. The county governments are very rarely willing to tell the state government no. And the town governments are very rarely willing to tell the county governments no. And I think that if we actually want to bring liberty to the people of this country, my focus is on North Carolina, but I would love, if this campaign does what I hope it can do, I'd love for that to inspire other states, right? We need this movement happening every single state in the country, people looking at, okay, is the governor's race attainable? Or are there things that make it, worth trying to go after that? If yes, great, go after that. But you know what is always attainable? Your town council, your local mayor. That's a winnable race. And if you can get principled people who actually believe that government's sole, primary function is to preserve and protect the rights of free people, right? That's what it's there for. And if you get a city council in a small size city like Gastonia, for example, where what kind of spawned a lot of my activism, they could push back on that, right? They can go back, and if state level policy, right? And I'm just going to give you a real kind of localized example. The North Carolina legislature demands essentially that every 8 years, all municipalities, every county goes in and does property tax reevaluations, right? They evaluate, assess, and increase the taxes on people. And this guy who's running for mayor kind of put this thing out there where he's like, hey, I see everybody's suffering. I know that people are going to lose their homes over this. And I kind of put it out there and I said, well, why didn't you guys just tell the state, no, we're not going to reassess? Well, it's required by law, right? That's their cop out, is to just push it up the chain. These people up here have more power, where I would like to see politicians who would stand and say, you know what? No, all of the people in my community are going to suffer from this. We'll raise taxes when our people want us to raise taxes, not when the North Carolina General Assembly is telling us that we have to raise taxes on our people. And I would love to inspire hundreds or thousands of people to go run for their local city council and try to do what I'm doing in my campaign for governor, right? I'm running on, I'm going to push back. I am going to be a steel curtain from the federal government as well as the state government infringing on the rights of people. That's it, right? And I've got policy planks that I think some of them appeal to conservatives, some of them appeal to progressives. Ultimately, I'll tell anybody one-on-one, if you're a conservative and you want to vote for a Republican or vote for me, here's what I'll tell you. I'll deliver more things that you care about than the Republican will. And I would say the exact same thing to the progressive, right? The progressives, they're going to campaign on a whole bunch of stuff that they want, that they think you're going to like. I'll deliver the few ones that I know that you're going to like within my platform. And both typical Republican or Democrat voters, if they vote for me and I somehow pull this off and become the next governor of North Carolina, I will deliver more for them than either of their parties will, and I'll do it without infringing on anybody's rights.
Oh yeah, it's so much with a stroke of a pen. Hey, let's get rid of some government interference for once. Let's get rid of some of these regulations.
Yeah, and the message is to empower the local governments too. Tell them you're at the local level, right? People in Raleigh should not be dictating how you manage your city or your town or your community. You should be doing that.
It's the zoning. Why are you have state down zoning and permitting requirements? Now I'm in the multifamily space, the investors, apartment complex and stuff. And when you're looking to build a new house, almost a 30-year cost is because of government taxes, permits, having to do these extra things with engineers, and red tape. It's costing more time to build it and everything else that could be sped up so quickly.
Well, and think about the interrelatedness, right? Because that's something that a lot of conservatives, right? Conservatives love to talk about that, right? The overreach of government regulation, right? And it's one of those things that I to some extent, I agree with them. I think that their tool for fixing it is completely inefficient and will not solve the problem. And voting harder for Republicans will not fix these things, even though the Republicans may say that they will. Right. But when you look at things like zoning, right, and the impact that does, you're adding cost to the process, a lot of cost. Meanwhile,
and slowing time.
Yeah. Slowing time. Everything about it is making the process less efficient. And then you have this very real crisis that the Democrats sure love to talk about. But when I was out there with a bunch of libertarians spending 9 months rallying at every city council meeting at the local government over this thing. The Democrats sure didn't show up. What was I advocating for? I was advocating to help the homeless. They claim to care about that. They claim that that's the big thing that, one of the big things that they care about. Look at the connection, right? Like here we had a church who was already getting 60 people outside of, inside from
sanctuary.
Right. Well, their plan is they want to build 200 like really small, almost like tiny house or apartment type of thing, and build out like a full service. Like, hey, we're going to have here where we connect people with services. Here we have to bring in counseling to help restore people's dignity. Here we want to have a program to help connect them with life skills and employment skills and ways to help them become, elevate their socioeconomic status, right? Like come out from that situation. Well, okay, if you want to fix homelessness, how about you get rid of these zoning laws that make it so that there's no way in heck that this pastor can ever do this, right? Like we look at it and it's like, hey, if we're able to raise $10 million or something like that, we could probably have like 200 permanent homes for people as well as this program. The government won't let him do that. Like they will not let you do that. And the way I see it is if it's your property, right? It's your property. It's along the mission of the business. What are all these hurdles doing? Who are they helping? I mean, I look at the economics. Well, they're helping the developers that have connections to the political class because they don't sure have problems getting their projects approved. But if you're a thorn in the side of the local government, even if what you're trying to do is completely altruistic and good for society, they're not going to let you do it.
An uphill battle.
Yeah, they're not going to let you do it.
Now, property rights. Okay. This is one, being libertarian, this is huge on the foundational levels. Like you own your body.
Yeah.
As the first fundamental level. That way you're not a drone beholden to government. That's why it's divine given rights.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing that I guess, some conservatives where they view the Constitution as the source of the rights. The Constitution is not the source of anything. It's a piece of paper. Those are natural rights that our founding fathers just had enough sense in them to say, hey, as we're creating this new government, let's acknowledge these fundamental natural rights and make it explicit that the government does not have any right to infringe on these rights. It's not like we followed those things in practice over these years, but
they were smart enough.
Yeah.
To know that, like, as it is now, it's not going to work. It's going to become tyranny. Let's at least try and put some roadblocks in it so we have a longer point before we have true tyranny and need another revolution to start over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing where you go down this situation where, like, a couple of the things that are on my campaign. I'm sorry, I bringing it into the campaign, right? One of the things is peace through prosperity. And it's one of the things that I want to talk about because progressives are generally like okay with the whole idea of taxation, right? Where they're like, tax the rich, tax the billionaires. One, I just say, do the math. Like that's the biggest problem. Go do the math on what your proposal was and see how far that gets us to actually solving the problem. Because it doesn't. Once you do the math, you realize you could take 100% of all the wealth of every single billionaire in this country, and the government will spend it in like a few months. And now those billionaires who are actually like driving forward society with innovation and creating new ways to make our life better, now they don't exist. The government would
1% has 22% of the money and already pays like 42% of the taxes.
Yeah. I mean, the math.
They're paying matter. More than their share, as it is.
What people look at, right? Because it's easy to look at the income tax, but as a governor, I don't have any ability to strike back at the federal income tax. I don't, right? As governor, aside from being a thorn in the side of the federal government, there's not much I can do about that. But there's a lot of state level taxes that people don't even think about, right? Like progressives don't think about it. The gas tax, right? They say it's for the roads, right? They say that the gas tax, who does the gas tax hurt? Do you really think that the billionaire cares about the gas tax? No, but that single mother who's trying to get to work, she sure does. When she's paying more for gas in the car, as well as more for everything that she's buying, food. Guess what? Gas tax was implemented and shipping that there, layers of taxation throughout the whole process. If we can strip away all those layers of taxation that impact all of us, that's how you bring about prosperity for the masses, not through government handouts, not through shifting get the government out of the way, get things like occupational licensing schemes and everything that makes it harder for people to conduct honest business in the state of North Carolina. Do away with that and just watch what will happen to communities.
The occupational stuff, like, I'm sorry, you should not have to have a license to be able to drive or travel or anything else. This is violations of your rights. These laws should be able to be abolished through the court.
So some of them, right? Like, and part of this is, I'm very libertarian, like very, very libertarian. And I understand that, that at least thought process wise makes me a minority, right? Like from a standpoint of ideologically, I'm a minority ideologically. And I don't think that there's an appetite for North Carolina, in North Carolina, for the masses to fully embrace like every level of abolition of functions of government that I would. Right. And that's okay. I'm not trying to get in there and be a tyrant with that either and just like force a libertarian utopia on everybody. Right. That's not actually my goal. So I don't think there's an appetite for at least not now. Right. Hopefully, a couple of years into it, we can have that conversation. But for now, I want to focus on like basic things. Right. Like your barber. Right. Like, why does your barber have to spend thousands of dollars to get permission to cut your hair? It should be as simple as, hey, this guy or gal gives a really good haircut and they do it at a good price. I don't really care if they have a permission slip from the government. They give me a good haircut at a good price, whether it's hair braiding, whether it's like food trucks. There's all these things that it's essentially selling you your right back. This is something that you should have a fundamental right to do. The government is taking it away from you and saying, hey, you want that natural right? If you pay us, you can have your right back. That's nonsense. It's fundamentally nonsense.
And we can still take it away from you anytime we want.
Right. But those are the kind of things that I think that North Carolina, both conservatives, progressives, everything in between, I think there are some things that the masses, and I've tested this out in just talking to voters, talking to people, right? There's certain things in North Carolina that there's actually agreement on between conservatives and progressives, right? Like occupational licensing, most of them are like, hey, should that single mother who's been working here and she's been practicing, she's now doing real good haircuts, and she wants to just cut hair and make a living for that because she can do better than working at the convenience store. Right now, she can't do that. Like, even if she had the means of it, talent, everything else, that process is designed to pick winners and losers, right? If you are connected and you're willing to pay to play, the government will let you operate your honest business. Heck, sometimes they'll even let you operate a dishonest business if you pay the fees, as evidenced by all of the fraud. But if you want to conduct
or the gambling,
yeah. But if you want to conduct an honest business, but you don't want to pay for permission to the government, they're going to shut you down and not let you do that. Who does that benefit? Well, it benefits the people who are able and willing to pay into this corrupt system by stomping out competition, which conservatives will, at least on the face, generally agree. Like, competition is good for the consumer. We should have as much competition and as many things as possible, because ultimately that will benefit all of us when people are competing for our voluntary exchange of dollars for goods and services.
I agree. And the one that I would like to see you work on, because it affects everybody, because everybody's got to have a place to live, is the property tax. Because you don't own your property if you're getting taxed on it every single year. You're renting it from the government. That's
it. All of us are leasing our property from the government. And that's the reality. And that's where the state level government pushing that down on all the counties, right? And I'm most familiar with Gaston County because that's where I live, right? But when the state is pushing down and telling all counties in the state that they have to, regardless of the economic situation, regardless of the wills of, the will and consent of the population, regardless of all of those things, they're forcing you to reappraise property values. And for a lot of people, specifically like lower income people, right, where there were houses that before this assessment were valued at 100,000, they're now valued at like 220. We're talking over 100% increases. What does that do? I am thankfully blessed to be in the middle class. So I will just begrudgingly pay the higher rent to the crown because I'm able to. But what happens to that little old lady who's on Social Security, who's trying to keep her house, and now all of a sudden her property taxes double? Now she's losing her house, right? Now we're contributing to the homeless problem. The government, if she's even a little bit late, can come in there, forget the house is paid off. They're just going to take it. right? Like you fall behind on your property taxes. They'll show you how quickly you don't own your property. Just go 2 years without paying your property taxes and see if you actually own your property anywhere in the country.
Ohio is 3 years.
Is it 3? They'll give you 3 years before they take it. Okay, but yeah,
because there's classes for the investing. Like, hey, you can go pay somebody's property taxes, and they either have to pay you back 11% on the money, or
take it.
After the third year paying the property tax, you get their house for the property taxes. And that was actually a big deal out here.
It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous that we've accepted that as a society, right? And I think it's because, part of it I think is the propaganda, right? Like people don't like to think through propaganda and the ideas of propaganda, but every population is very heavily propagandized by their own government, us included.
Okay, for propaganda, we're back to property taxes. This would give, this is Ohio numbers, you'd give a raise of $300 a month average to every homeowner. And when you're looking at bigger apartment complexes and stuff, that is still like 30% of their revenues go towards taxes. So you'd be able to give a huge cut on rental rates across the state, which would save everybody money.
Right.
We could be defunding the schools to stop the propaganda machine.
Yeah, so that it's funny talking on the schools. So that's a position where it's a big issue for the voters of North Carolina. There's been some polling. The 3 biggest issues in the state of North Carolina for voters, right, regardless of left, right, center, anything, wherever they line up, it's the economy, it's education, and it's healthcare. Those are the 3 most important issues to the average voter in the state of North Carolina. And I've taken kind of a different approach to education. I haven't actually seen my education plan from anywhere. We just kind of thought through that, because if you come out there and say, that you want to abolish the public school system, you're not going to get elected, for one. And this might sound crazy to some libertarians. I don't want to abolish the public school system. Here's why, right? Because I told you earlier, I'm a very hardcore libertarian, and now I'm telling you that I don't want to abolish the public school system. So you're like, are you really a hardcore libertarian? So let me walk you through my education plan. I'm running on this. If I am elected as governor of North Carolina, this will be how I approach education in the state of North Carolina. And it comes down to one thing. I want to break the monopoly on education that the government has currently, right? So currently you have this system where it's a public school system, and by default, you're mandating enrollment of all children, and the default is send them to the public school system, right? Regardless of whether that is A, best for the child, B, best for the parent, C, best for the teacher, or D, best for the taxpayer. They don't care. That's the system. So my plan starts is, okay, there's actually something in the North Carolina Constitution that requires the state of North Carolina to actually provide education. Okay, so within the state constitution of the state of North Carolina, we are required to provide education for the children, right? So forget whether I like that or not. That is the constitution of the state I'm looking to govern, and I must uphold the constitution of the state I'm taking an oath of office in, and I'm going to take that seriously. However, the way we do that is completely wrong, and it's completely ignoring the basics of economics. So what we need to do, and this is right there in my platform, is if we are going to have tax revenue fund education in the state of North Carolina as required by the state constitution, we need to do this in a way that eliminates any state interest or influence on the process of education. So the way this will work is real simple. We spend about $11 billion a year on education in the state of North Carolina. It's about, I think, 30-ish% of our state budget just for education, right? So the idea comes down to, okay, take the total amount being spent on education, divide it by the number of students. Okay, got an equal amount for every single student. Right now, it's roughly about $10,000 per student that the state of North Carolina pays for education, right? Instead of saying, we're going to fund all of these schools directly, we're going to say, okay, hey, parents, here's this $10,000. Send your student wherever you think it's best, whether it's something that's in existence now or something that the free market creates. And that's why I'm calling it a free market education plan. Right. So the idea is the parents have the control, and that's what happens. So from day one, nothing changes. All the kids are already enrolled in public school. That kid goes to the public school. That public school gets the dollars, and they have to operate in a competitive basis with the dollars that are there. But if let's say a teacher from there says, hey, I don't like this system. I have a new idea. I want to set up a micro school, and I'm going to have 20 students, and I'm going to teach them from kindergarten to 12th grade. And I'm going to leave here, and I'm going to take that. If those 20 students leave that public school and go to this teacher's new micro school, guess what? Now that micro school is getting that $10,000 times 20. Now that teacher's operating with a $200,000 a year budget to educate these 20,000 or to educate these 20 students. Now the teacher's getting paid more. The kids are getting much more personalized hands-on education, and the dollars leave the public schools. Now, what I envision will happen is with an understanding of economics is the public schools are now going to be forced to compete, right? If they want those dollars and they want to exist, they're going to have to compete with who is providing the best education for children, driven by the parents. I wish the public schools the best of luck. I hope that they can do things like cutting out woke administration that's taking six-figure salaries, effectively reducing how much teachers are getting paid so that somebody who provides no real value to the education of children is sopping up a huge amount of that budget. So the idea is pull that out of there. The dollars follow the students completely, and you destroy the loophole that North Carolina politicians use to screw people out of the education dollars, right? We have the education lotto, which they promote out there with the propaganda how great this is for education, right? Oh, bringing in billions of dollars for education. But the way that the education lottery works in the state of North Carolina is, let's say that they budget $11 billion for education, right? Come out, $11 billion for education. Now let's say that the lottery brings in $1 billion, right, to education. Well, they take $1 billion from the budget. Now the politicians can spend that billion on everything else because the budget is still 11 billion, but instead of it coming from the general funds, we get $1 billion of it coming in from the education lottery. So the idea is I don't want government mandating curriculum. I don't want them mandating standards, any of that. However, if the government wants to have some say in establishing like some basic competencies, I think that a lot of Republicans and Democrats probably would want to have something like that. The lottery
into education.
Yeah, well, that will actually go in. No more changing it. The first part of distributing it to the students directly, right? Like, so of equitable distribution of those dollars goes in, but then those extra education dollars, right, to any school that actually meets core competencies determined by the legislature, right? Things like reading, math, history, ecology, personal finance, basic home and like things that actually, because the whole purpose of the school system should be to help children become productive, successful adults, right? Like that's what we need. And part of my plan is to funnel that education dollars, and basically everyone's getting 10,000. But if the way that comes out with the schools that meet these competency standards, maybe the kids that go to those schools are getting 12,000, right? So that way you're not pigeonholing like a poor family into going into a failing public school. If that public school cannot step up and provide a good quality education, they can take those dollars and not be bound by their zip code. They can just go, where's the best school in my area that I can use here? And now I can go send my child here and get that child an education that can help elevate our family's socioeconomic situation.
And some other states have already done the voucher systems to get them into more of the private, the Montessori and other types of schools. So it's like there is precedence for what you're saying to move it along those lines.
I'm just going very, very radical with it, right? Like, so my Republican opponent, and it's probably going to be Mark Robinson, although Dale Folwell has entered. So the Republicans are going to have their primary too. And they're passing, they're doing the whole school choice thing. My problem with school choice is it's a step in the right direction, but it's a baby step, right? As long as you still have the state government and these school boards that are dictating curriculum and pushing it down, essentially, if you take the school choice voucher program and expand it the way it is now, and even tried to take the existing structure and take a lot from my plan, essentially what you end up doing is you just end up turning all schools into public schools. That's not what I want. I want the government out of the business of telling us what curriculum is best for our children. That is up to the parents, the teachers, the students, and the free market.
Well, exactly. Like, why doesn't a kid learn how to do a balance sheet for their income, expenses, assets, and liabilities, and
Absolutely. My kid
Actually
is,
get
because
a
I
financial
homeschool.
education.
Yeah, I mean, my kid is. He's in sixth grade right now. He's 11, and he did a book report on economics in one lesson, which I wish every American would read.
There you go. I like my dad was teaching me contracts for construction jobs and that when I was like 7.
Yeah, and
And
you
that
know what?
stuff, they never taught any of that stuff in high school, college, or anywhere else.
No, I mean, they don't even teach you that when you graduate from high school, you're gonna get a slew of things in the mail offering you credit cards, which will make you think that you have free money, and before you know it, you're 25 filing for bankruptcy with $40,000 in debt. You don't get a warning about that in the public school system, and that, to me, that's really setting your children up for failure. To not teach them the way economics works and how personal financial responsibility is a way to actually empower your future, as opposed to making it more challenging.
Right. You're 18, you can't get a business loan, but hey, we'll give you all the loans you want for college and these few free credit cards to play with to just ruin yourself and put you in debt for life. So you are in debt slavery.
Yeah,
and
you want 100,000.
here.
You want to get a $150,000 degree in basket weaving, no problem. You want 10 grand to go start a lawn company. Sorry, kid, you need to prove your credit worthiness. Like that's the reality of life in America right now, and it's horrible. But again, that all these things are interconnected, right? It's all the Fed, it's all the free money, it's all of that fuels it, and it's government interference in the economy.
Well, towards the end there, and we got talking about crypto earlier. We'll wrap this up. What CBDCs, how bad they are? What are your thoughts on future blockchain technologies? Like, I know I'd love to see where the mining and everything is done by your cell phone, so you can even and level out the decentralization. But that's my own thought. What about you for where the blockchain and crypto is going to help freedom?
So I'm a Bitcoin purist, right? And I'm actually a professional financial advisor, right? I manage money for a living and do financial planning. And for years, I've actually professionally recommended Bitcoin to my clients. Not a, reasonable amounts, right? It's still a high risk asset class. Most cryptocurrencies, and some libertarians will get mad at me, most cryptocurrencies I believe are Ponzi schemes. Most of them provide no value. Most of them don't even have good tokenomics. However, the idea behind blockchain is very empowering. I think Bitcoin, again, is to me the gold standard of cryptocurrency. It's something that I think everybody should at least have, say, 1% of their investable assets in. But a central bank digital currency, that's the death knell for freedom in this country. I've even joked, because going through these crazy markets, I've had clients, like, oh, Mike, with all these swings and all this, doesn't it beat down on you? And I'm dead serious. And I've never said this to, in a public setting. If we get a central bank digital currency in the United States, I will immediately shut down my business. Immediately. Because I don't think that there is a space for what I do for a living in a world that has a central bank digital currency. I don't. There will be no value that any financial advisor or money manager can do, because we will no longer actually have any ability to influence the system. The second they get that, it is a financial weapon of mass destruction. It is the ultimate power, and I think that is the death knell on liberty in the United States if they ever implement it. It's probably the single biggest thing that bothers me about the direction we're going, because I truly believe it's the death knell for liberty if they get a CBDC in the United States.
That and the Restrict Act, that's the Trojan horse on banning TikTok and being able to declare anybody a foreign adversary and jail them.
Yeah.
For using a virtual private network.
The Unlimited Destroy Rights of Americans Act. Yeah, that's the Restrict Act, right? It restricts the rights of all Americans. That's if you're trying to name it appropriately and keep the name. What does the Restrict Act do? It restricts the rights and freedoms of every single American for whatever arbitrary reason the government ever decides now or at any point in the future.
Yep. No FOIA requests, no oversight. Well, thank you, Mike, for trying to stand up for freedom for us. And as far as the Bitcoin, it's gone from like 16,000 to 28,000 in the last 6 months. So it's at least back on the upswing. I thought it was going to hit 10 grand, so I was wrong before the bounce. It didn't quite go down, but I did find out there was
I don't pick them, man. I don't try to pick tops, bottoms. I dollar cost average in, as I have for like 8 years, a little bit every week. And yeah, that's my approach. I want Bitcoin 10 years from now, so I really don't care what it does in the next year. I want to buy it every chance I get.
There you go. So, Mike, thank you for being on the show, and all of you there, please like and subscribe so you can get more videos on freedom. Now, how can they help you out with your campaign, get a hold of you here, especially my friends in North Carolina?
Yeah. So if you are in North Carolina, please head to my website, firetheuniparty.com. It's like right there, right? If you want to volunteer, I am looking to visit all 100 counties in the state of North Carolina and actually out campaign my Republican and Democrat opponents. I am going to campaign harder than them. I will not be able to pull this off without you. Whether you want to knock on doors, whether you want to make phone calls, whether you want to work the polls, whatever it is, head to my website, sign up to be a volunteer. If you are outside of North Carolina, I will not be able to compete with raising $100 to $200 million like they will. However, I can be a lot more efficient with the dollars that are spent, and not throw lavish parties with donors and things like that. Please consider donating. Again, I'm traveling to all 100 counties in the state. I'm putting a lot of my own money into the campaign, but I'm really looking to stretch it. I promise you that I will be a good steward with those dollars and push a great message of liberty to the people of North Carolina. And as far as on social media, at Fire the Uniparty, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of those places. So yeah, Jedi, thanks so much for having me on the show, and thanks for all your listeners.
Thank you, Mike, there. I'll talk to you for just a second after we stop the recording, but thank you all for tuning in today. Make sure you like and subscribe. Peace.
Thanks so much.